Hi, my guest today is Helen Parsons. Helen, I'll get this right, get the pronunciation right. Helen is a doula, a perinatal educator, and a therapist. So, can I say, welcome, Helen?
Thank you, Tania. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Did I miss out anything on that description of you and what you do?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the work that I do. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've been working in the perinatal is from pregnancy all the way through until post birth, really up to the first year. Really might be
Hmm.
considered the perinatal. So this is the area where I specialise with my work.
I think it's a fascinating area myself, because I have worked with people. I have worked with women who've been pregnant.
Yeah,
And what was I going to say? Yeah, and they've gained great benefit of that when I've used
yeah.
EFT with them. So, really see their role. So maybe you could explain a little bit, because I think a lot of people won't be familiar with the term a doula. At least in the UK, they won't be.
Yeah, no, it's becoming a term that's perhaps a little bit more mainstream. The term doula is actually a Greek word and it means woman servant. And I love that. And that's effectively what a doula is doing. It typically is a woman who's a doula. Typically, doulas have had children of their own and gone through that process. So, in some ways, they're a peer supporter. Um, and the role of a doula is to serve the woman through labour, effectively
Mm,
through labour and the birth. Many doulas like myself will work with a woman and her partner, and
mm,
sometimes the wider family. Sometimes getting to know the children if there's other children, right from quite early on. So sometimes from as early as 16 weeks, I can be working with families,
mm,
and then you'll work right the way through till the first couple of months. Some doulas do postnatal work specifically, so they may work with the family postnatally, doing work in the home once baby's here. My focus is really around pregnancy and labour and birth, and I work with families within the first couple of months usually. Um, so yeah, doulas provide emotional and practical support in the main. There's
mm.
no clinical role to a doula. A doula isn't replacing any medical professional, so it's not a stand-in or a substitute for a midwife or anything like that. It's very much an additional supporter
Mm.
that gets to know the woman, the couple very, very well, so that by the time you get to the birth, you've got a real good understanding of what she wants through her birth and how you can help her to have her voice heard.
Yeah, and I think that's very key, helping her to have a voice heard. Having two children myself,
Yeah,
and I'll just share this story. I absolutely got my husband to promise that I would not have what's that, epidural, isn't it? I
yeah,
said
yeah,
no, I'm not having that. Because I'd read things I didn't like about it, and
yeah,
I didn't want to take that kind of drug. I did take the gas in air, I believe. Well, I know I did. So no, that was okay. But that one, I am not doing that because, it's just I wanted it more natural and I didn't want to take something I thought could be detrimental to me and my child. But anyway, this labor went on and on and on and on. And the doctors came in and the nurses said, "Oh, no, you got to have that epidural." And I said, "No." And my husband said, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't." They just got more and more doctors and piling
yeah.
down on me, putting this pressure on me. And I said, "No, no, I'm not doing it." And my husband was waning. You come to this agreement. Anyway, so I had the baby without that, but then I did have to have an operation afterwards, a very quick one. And I was okay then because for me, it was all about the baby, really, and
Yeah,
making sure
yeah.
that I did what I felt was right for my baby. But I guess in part of your role would be helping the woman be heard. Am I right there or wrong
It,
there?
it is, and I think often in my experience, just the presence of a doula
Mm,
means that helps the woman be heard. I mean, sometimes in birth, I may have a conversation with the health professionals to talk about the birth plans and wishes. Sometimes the midwives may even ask me separately, especially when perhaps the birth has gone a little bit different from the plan, to get an understanding of how to handle things. So many places where I've done births are very engaging with doulas and welcome the fact that they've got another pair of, practical hands to help around, that they don't have to stay in the room the whole time when there's somebody else there to support. So I think just the presence of a doula sometimes is enough for them to think, we need to listen to what this woman is saying. And so there definitely is a difference there, I think, when a doula is present.
Well, you're coming in as an experienced person, and my experience of the midwives is they run off their feet usually. They're working so hard. I think they generally work more than one birth at the same time. Am I right with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in the UK, women are supposed to get one-to-one care through labour. But that can sometimes be that the midwife is outside the room most of the time, popping back in again. And that's, that should be largely down to what the woman and the birth partner want as well, because some people do want to be left alone, and there's a buzzer there if they need somebody, and the women want more support and want the midwife in the room all the time. So I think it's about listening to what a woman wants and responding to that. But I've had some really good positive responses. There's sometimes a little bit of a chatter amongst the ward in some places where I've been, there's a doula here, but I've always been accepted and treated with the utmost of respect. I mean, very kindly. I mean, I've had the tea and toast brought to me after birth, along with the birth partner and the woman that's just given birth. And so I've always had really, really good relations with them wherever I've worked, whether that's a home or hospital or birth centre.
Well, that's, I don't know if I was going to say it's a typical British thing, bring the tea out.
Yeah, tea and toast.
Tea and toast, is it?
Yeah, ask any woman that's ever given birth about the tea and toast, and it's the best meal ever. It's the best meal ever. And if women don't get it, if they've been, not got it for some reason, they're not happy. And having experienced it myself, I don't know if you remember, but I did get the tea and toast after my first birth, and it's the cheapest bread with the cheapest butter. It's probably in a little plastic, the tea's in a plastic cup, and it just tastes divine.
It's like a ceremony, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real reward, and it feels like that after, especially if you've had a long labour, it can feel like you really deserve it.
I did have a long labour on the first one, but the interesting thing is afterwards you forget that, don't you? Then you go on for baby number 2.
You do. I mean, I did a birth quite recently, and I had this conversation with my clients, and I said, you do. She goes, I'm never going to forget this. It's it's too big, and obviously, emotions can be sensations and emotions can be very, very intense. And I was like, you will, because we can't hold on to this, because life has to move on with what baby needs. And just a few days later, and I said, you will say that it's that it's worth it, because it's quite an intense day. No, I can't see that. And then within a couple of days, she's like, oh my God, I'm starting to see all the positives now, and I'm starting to forget all the intense bits. And you're right, he's absolutely worth it. And I'm like, because otherwise we'd never have any more. It's the most intense experience I think a woman probably goes through.
Yeah, nature, I believe nature actually has a mechanism for that and deliberately makes us forget.
I think absolutely. I think oxytocin is probably part of that. Yeah,
I think so. I did read it at one time that it was a deliberate, natural thing that happened. And then what happens is you get to the second birth and suddenly you go, oh, I remember that first one now.
Too late.
Too late. But then there's a lovely reward, isn't there, usually for most people at the end of that, in the most beautiful way, But
for most of the time, not always, obviously. And
Yeah,
we
obviously,
can talk about that.
and that's a different area. I don't know if you go down that area, but it's a big topic in and of itself. So let's pull it back then to people bring you in as the doula. What would be the reason that they would bring you in? What would motivate them to do that, Helen?
So sometimes it's first time parents who are looking for additional support. And that can be for a number of reasons. Sometimes it can be because they have a history of anxiety already, and often that can be heightened in pregnancy. Sometimes they can have anxieties around hospital, and they want to have a home birth, and they want a doula to help them to stay at home. Or to help to support their wishes, especially if, for instance, their decision to have a home birth is what we term against advice, which is often many women have home births all the time against advice. Often I've been chosen as a doula because of my experience with women who've had previous cesarean births and want to have a vaginal birth the next time, perhaps even at home. And so they've sought me out because of my experience, particularly with what we call VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean. And I've even supported women who've had previously 2 cesareans and then wanted to go on and have a home birth. And so there's I have a lot of knowledge around how to navigate that pathway with healthcare professionals. And I know we're not going to talk about that today, but also women who've had a previous traumatic experience. And they choose me because they want someone that's going to work with them through their pregnancy to help them to resolve previous trauma. And that could be birth trauma, but it could also be pregnancy loss, neonatal loss, because that can be very scary if you're then pregnant again, going into another birth. So I have a lot of experience in that particularly as well. So it's a range of things. Sometimes I'm picked because dad doesn't want to be there, birth partner doesn't want to be at the birth, or he can't be at the birth. I once supported a couple and he was in China for 3 weeks leading up to the birth. So that was quite scary. So I went on call just for the 3 weeks, just in case dad wasn't back in time. Nature always has a way, and I think women often have a way as well of waiting. And so she didn't go into labour until dad got back. So lots of reasons why women might choose a doula, and why they might choose
you specifically, because you're trained in working with trauma using techniques like
exactly. Exactly.
I'm going to have to pull you back because you said something very interesting in all of that. You said a lot of very interesting things, but I'll pull you back to you talked about women who'd previously had a cesarean and then wanted a vaginal birth. Yeah. What's the difference then in the birthing process when they do that? Is there a difference? Does it impact how the body functions?
Oh, we could be in a long discussion around this. So women who've had a previous cesarean, even if they've had 2, should be supported with whatever choice that they want. So whether that might be them choosing to have another cesarean, they should be supported to do that. These days, they probably will be encouraged more to try for a vaginal birth than to try to go for another cesarean. But it can be a little bit of a tricky pathway, and certainly having births at home might be considered against advice if you've had a cesarean. And some birth centres won't admit women into their birth centres if they've had a cesarean, but many birth centres do. So again, that's another message to find out which birth centres do and which don't. Some will support home birth after cesarean, some won't. So it can be tricky. The evidence in terms of a previous cesarean effectively says if the cesarean has been more than 12 months, really you should be treating that woman like any other woman who's had a baby. And keeping an eye on her, her vital signs, her pulse and her blood pressure and all the normal things that you would do with any other woman, and she should be treated the same. it's not always necessarily the case. So that's, you know, without going down too much of the medical side, what the medical establishment might say, actually there isn't a great deal of difference once a woman's in labour.
What I would think is that if a mother to be a mother to be chooses to have her child in one way and they're given conflicting information, that can be emotionally uncomfortable, can't it, really?
It can be, and if that's where you really need a supporter, and sometimes birth partner also needs a supporter as well, to be able to make sense of that information, to be able to make a decision for themselves. And I suppose what I help them to do is to clear any of that emotion so that they can see clearly to make a decision. I mean, you know this as well, to make any decision in life, especially big decisions, when we're burdened with anxiety and stress, it's very difficult.
All right, we're back now. Helen managed to get herself booted out the call.
What I did, I must have done something naughty, Zoom, didn't I?
Oh, yeah. However, if we go back to what we were talking about before, if I recap on that, basically we're talking about if a mother, mother to be wants to have a birth in a certain way, and she's giving conflicting information from medical people, that can create a lot of turmoil for father as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Medical people are authority figures, and we're always taught through life to kind of go with that. But a lot of people do a lot of educating themselves and have certain ways of wanting to do things. So you were telling us about that. So
so what I was saying, until Zoom quite naughtily kicked me out, was that the work that I do is not to make decisions for women and couples. That's absolutely not what a doula does. And often a doula is hired after a couple have already decided what kind of birth they want, and they hire a doula to help them to get there. It's never the other way around. But one of the things that I do, particularly with the experience that I've got around managing anxiety, is to clear that anxiety, so that women and couples can make their decisions free of the anxiety, the fear, because there is a lot of fear projected onto women, much of the time unnecessarily. Statistics which are there, that are very, very tiny, are often presented in it as if they're much bigger than they are. And I think that's we don't get that in any other area of medical care. And I think there's something different about when you're carrying another human being in your body. You're suddenly not treated as if you're advocating just for yourself. We won't go down that. That's a conversation for another day. But I think that's where it perhaps becomes different. So I sort of help to clear that anxiety and that fear, and perhaps some often unnecessary fear, irrational fear, so that they can make a decision free of that, and then that decision is much more likely to be true to what they really want and based on real evidence, rather than on fear and anxiety.
Yeah, and that's a really important point you make. When we are faced with any decision in life, we should never make the decision from a place of fear and anxiety. I've had a lot of people who've come to me. I work right across the board in a lot of different issues, but I've had a lot of people who've come to me and said, I'm just about to jack my job in.
Yeah.
And they got all this emotion going on. And I usually say to them, can you hang on a minute? Really, all decisions are best made from a balanced place.
Absolutely.
Because right now you're being driven by the underlying emotions to do this. Let's clear the emotion, and then let's look at this in a very rational, informed way, and then make a decision. And that's exactly what you're doing here, isn't it, really?
Absolutely, bringing it back into balance. And there is a lot of fear, especially the closer you get to labour and birth, through labour and birth itself. There's a lot of labour, a lot of fear that is projected onto women through birth, that they then have to make a massive decision through. I mean, it's unrealistic to expect anyone to be able to manage through that, really.
You say projected onto women. How exactly would you say it's projected onto women?
I think through the language that's used with women. So often the language that is used is often language of fear and things going wrong. Yes, right. Of course that happens, but statistically it's very small. But I think sometimes it's blown up. I think unfortunately sometimes it's used as a way to coerce. I hate to say, but it's true, and I have seen it sadly. The fear is used to get women to do what they want a woman to do. So I think that's what I mean by it's projected on. Often this fear, sometimes fear is coming from women themselves because of anxiety or whatever. Absolutely. But sometimes I've had clients who are very, very clear with what they want, very strong, very capable. And then this fear is projected onto them. And then they have to try and get through it and make a big decision. It's very difficult.
And it then comes down to what tools, and I have since this is EFT Unleashed, what tools are you using to help a person deal with those emotions, both partners?
Yeah, so with a couple, working with them antenatally, so identifying what some of these potential barriers might be coming from their side. So sometimes there are clear ones. So a previous birth had issues around hospital and going to hospital, and that's why she wanted a home birth. I realised that we needed to tackle that because there could be a chance of being transferred into hospital, and what I didn't want for her was for everything to spiral out of control just because we were changing location. So we worked quite a lot on, and that stemmed back to a previous trauma around hospital, around consent. So sometimes it will be something very specific. Other times it's giving them tools. So a lot of the time I'll use a lot of positive tapping antenatally, so that we can use that through labour and bring those emotions back, either when we were feeling very, very happy, if you're having a low moment, or very strong, very resourceful, very capable, so that we can tap into that in labour itself, and remind when when a woman might be having a bit of a wobble, I can use it because we've already done that work. So I can use the phrase that we've created through EFT, and that's really, really powerful, really, really powerful.
So I'll pull it back a little bit just to summarize what you've said, but then I'd love to look at that positive tapping stuff you've been doing. But I'll pull it back. First off, what you're saying is people can have had past traumas that then get triggered or are potentially could be triggered during the birthing process. Like you say, I don't know if I had a hospital trauma myself, but I do remember my brother broke his arm once and was in hospital, nearly fainted. So he's the one with a broken arm. I'm the one who nearly fainted. As a child. So, I mean, that potentially could leave a person with a legacy that then, because the mind works with via association. So it can link hospital with feeling faint. Yeah.
Yeah.
And EFT, I'm assuming that you use the EFT or you use EFT with those kind of traumas.
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular instance, I have permission to share this story from my client, because she had used tapping with a therapist in the past before I met her, which was great. She was familiar with it. But even if she hadn't been, I would have used it and introduced it and have done with other clients. But she knew that she had issue around consent, particularly around consent and related to hospital. And this was manifesting throughout her pregnancy with everything, every interaction that she was having with a health professional. And when I had a chat with her, we explored what might have happened in the past. And it turned out that when she was 4, she remembers that she was held down. Ooh. So to have her tonsils out, and she was told she was going to see a family friend, and as it turned out she wasn't. She was going to have her tonsils out. she was pinned down and forced to have a cannula, and she remembers that trauma. Now, she had not made that connection herself between this issue around consent and hospitals and that previous trauma. And so we spent one session, let's call it one session, to deal with that trauma when she was 4. Now, she was, doing a sort of about 9 or 10 around that event still when she was 4. That's like 30 years ago.
So pulling that back, so what you're saying is she got very high intensity now related to an event at the age of 4. Actually, showing that it wasn't processed out, that it was still raw within a mind-body system, and therefore influencing her behavior now.
So she was visibly upset, really upset when she thought about it. And so, we processed that down so that there was no emotion left with that at all. And, what happened was we did end up in hospital, and she did need a cannula. And she said since to me, she said that was fine. I mean, it wasn't fine. It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be at home. That's not what I've chosen. But it was fine. I managed that and I could cope with that. And she said, I don't think that would have been like that had I not processed, had I not worked with Helen to have dealt with what was going on. And that's why tapping we can do for ourselves, but working with a therapist helps you to identify where that's coming from. I don't think she would have. She wouldn't have identified that for herself.
No, we don't, because it wasn't the connection wasn't in conscious awareness.
That's right.
Triggering perhaps was that she would go to certain places and, why am I feeling like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And she'd ended up having a couple of times where she had to go into hospital for monitoring. And she got in touch with me, and I just said, you've got this. You've got your, we've got that positive tapping link that she could use. She could use her tapping. And she was like, oh my God, I was more anxious at home thinking about it, and she was fine. And she had to go in subsequently another time, and then obviously we had the birth there. And that would, I think, well, I don't think she said it with her own words. That would have been very different had she not processed that. So that's just a really good example of where EFT specifically works with that previous trauma.
And actually really important, because what you're looking at is a child who's held down, or a person who's held down. They can feel powerless, helpless, and trapped. And they are very debilitating emotions indeed. And what she had is that stuff still locked within her system. And so, going to be, if she was like prone, like laid down and unable to move, the mind works by association. That could have been easily triggered in that environment. So that I mean, a lot of people have had these kind of experiences, past experiences that influence them now. And to really make that birthing process as smooth as possible, you want to be clearing that stuff out, because it's unprocessed and your mind can process it. Now, just to put it into perspective, the original event happened. It's over. She survived it. That is not the issue. The issue is that it never got processed out within a system. So it's still running within a system as if it's still live and happening now. And with the EFT, you just went there and
it's so quick. It's so quick. That's what I have other modalities that I use, as do you, Tania, I know, but this is my go-to. I will always use this first if I think it's appropriate, because it can be so quick and so effective. And then I might, if it hasn't done it, I might, use some other things like mindfulness or hypnotherapy, or perhaps some EMDR, depending. But this is my go-to because it's so quick. And can be used in a hospital environment, really easily. Women can use it themselves. They can do it for themselves, or I can do it on them with permission, obviously. So you've always got your hands, you've always got your fingers. You don't need any special equipment.
Putting that into perspective, a therapist can tap on themselves when they're working with a person, so there doesn't have to be any level of touching. But equally, you can tap on the client themselves if they give permission or are comfortable with that. So you can take over the tapping. that's a choice, and it's your client's choice, really, isn't it? Which way they prefer. But pulling that right back, EFT is a very powerful technique. I'll just put into my words how I actually regard it working. It's like a computer. You just press reboot. You
do.
tune into
It is.
that and reboot. Yeah. And your system literally, just reboots itself and processes out that event and puts it into old information files. Yes, it did happen. It is over. Yeah. And as a consequence, the client's just free of that. They know it happened, but they're free of it. That's what you're doing with your clients, isn't it?
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah.
but pulling that, so you deal with the trauma, you deal with the anxieties that may be going on for a person. You also teach them how to do positive tapping. All right, now, Helen, I'm going to put you on the spot. Well, hopefully not. I don't want to be pregnant now. I'm a bit past that.
EFT can't give you anything, Tania, and they definitely can't make you pregnant. So,
oh no, Helen.
Well,
Helen, I will give you a
if
story.
you don't want to be.
Yeah, no, I'll give you a story. I was working with a lady, and she'd had panic attacks many years ago, and lots of them for many, many, many years. And she came to me to deal with the panic attacks. Second session, she came and I said, what's happened since the last time I saw you? She said, nothing's changed. I said, have you had a panic attack? She said, no.
That's a change.
She wanted to work on. Then she brought up an underlying issue, which is she'd put off having a baby because of panic attacks. So I worked on that the second time. She came a few weeks later and she said, Tania, I've got news for you.
Great.
And she says, I'm pregnant. And I says, don't blame me. And we had a great laugh about it, but that took the fear away. Yeah. And her body did what was naturally right for her body, I think. But pulling that back, so if I was your client, Helen, how would you teach me that positive tapping for me to use? I mean, in what situations would I use it to start off with, and how would you teach it to me?
So I generally start to ask the client to think of a time when they were. So if we're trying to create a sense of happiness, of the most positive feelings that you could imagine. So a time when that you were particularly happy. Now I might say that I don't need to know what that is. I don't need to know the details, and they can just keep that to themselves, and that works really, really well. And then I might ask them to give it a name. So maybe to give it a colour. Colours work really well. So I might say, okay, so just thinking of a recent example, she called it the yellow emotions, and that's what we called it. And we tapped on the yellow emotions. The next time I used it, I did ask her, I said, do you feel comfortable to share with me a little bit more about this situation? She did. And so I could use little phrases. So again, all her own words. She was just describing this event, where they were, what time of day it was, what they were doing, how she was feeling. So I've got little phrases, little words that I can use that I can bring into the tapping and build up those feelings. And I encourage her to tune into what she's feeling in her body when she's feeling these emotions as well. So really tuning into the words, the tapping, the words and phrases, tapping, and that body sensation that she's feeling, so that the next time this is a real example of a recent client who had to go into hospital, and I just said, you tap on those yellow emotions, and that's all you need to tap on. She doesn't need any of the words, because she knows that event in her head. She doesn't need the words. They were her words. And so that's what she used in order for her to go into hospital and get checked out, and said, oh my God, that was so different. I thought I was going to be a wreck. I thought I was going to have a panic attack. And I was so relaxed. She said my blood pressure was, this is the other thing with tapping. I really think it can help with, if you're struggling with blood pressure that's anxiety induced, which hers was, and use tapping so that she could go in hospital, have a lovely, nice, good normal blood pressure reading and to come home again. So that's one of the ways that I use positive tapping. So we would tap on all the points, just repeating those phrases, yellow emotions.
Well, you see, you've told us how it's done, but now you need to show us how it's done. I will be your lady. I will be your standing client. Yeah. And because not everyone who may be listening to this understands how this is done. So we'll give them a proper demonstration because it's so simple.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if I was your client and you were guiding me through that, and it was, first off, I'll if you take it back and you tell me to think of something positive, take it from there. Yeah.
So Tania, so if you could think of a time in your life where you felt particularly happy, it doesn't have to be your most happy, but a time that stands out for you where you think, yes, that was a really happy time in my life.
Yeah, I can think of that.
Can you think of something? Do you feel comfortable sharing any details of that with me? Where you were, what you were doing, perhaps who you were with, how old you were?
Yeah, I was in my 20s. I was in show business. I was standing on the wings of the stage, waiting to go on in this TV show. And it's just this really kind of euphoric feeling I felt.
The euphoric feeling. And Tania, when you think about that, can you bring that back to mind now?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of effort. It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So if you do think about that, does any sensation come up in your body when you remember that? It doesn't matter if it doesn't.
A little bit, not so much. But what I would say is I was in an environment where they were putting all, like stage smoke out there. Yeah.
It was the dry ice.
Something like that. The stage smoke, the lights were all as they were all set for the show, all of that. And I was in the wings, feeling euphoric.
Feeling euphoric. So if we could give this a colour, what colour would it be? Red. Okay, so we're going to start here. Okay, so when we do some positive tapping, so Tania, the work that we've done before, if we're dealing with a problem, something we want to neutralize or get rid of, we use the words even though. When we're positive tapping, where we want to bring things more, we want to increase the intensity of something positive, we don't need those words because we're not trying to get rid of them. So if you just repeat the words after me, the red emotions.
The red emotions.
Those red emotions.
Those red emotions.
The red emotions.
The red emotions.
Okay, and tap with me, side of the eye. The red emotions.
The red emotions.
Side of the eye. Those red emotions.
Those red emotions.
Under the eye. These red emotions.
These red emotions.
Under the nose. The red emotions.
The red emotions.
And on the chin. These red emotions.
These red emotions.
Standing on the wings.
Standing on the wings.
Of the stage.
Of the stage.
When I was in show business.
When I was in show business.
In my 20s.
In my 20s.
Take a nice deep breath in. And let it go.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting me more into it there, Helen.
So I might do a couple of sets more.
Yeah.
So I might keep going a little bit and then reassess. Probably what I should have done is kind of graded how strong and how intense that feeling is at the start, and then we can see whether that improves. I tend to use this a lot at the end of my sessions, especially if we've worked on trauma or anxiety. I always tend to finish with some positive, leaving clients feeling good at the end of a session, especially if we've worked on something quite heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it's bringing them back to balance. Life can go like this sometimes. I mean, there's a movie called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, isn't there?
Yeah, and a song, Life is a Roller Coaster. And that's true, isn't it? It's true. Yeah.
But actually, positive tapping is a good thing to do at the end of the session if it's appropriate with that particular client, whether you're working on pregnancy or prenatal stuff, whatever is a nice thing to do. Now, there's so much more we could talk about, Helen, here, because it's a huge, huge subject. But I will finish here if this is okay with you. I mean, my mind will go to many different places of all the different things you can work in that area. But Helen, if people wanted to connect with you or find out about your work, how would they do that? Mm-hmm.
So I have a website, which is my name, helenparsons.co.uk. So they can find me on there. And that's probably the best place to find my contact details.
We'll come back. Let's spell that out, because I know some people, although that we're doing a video here, some people will listen to this on audio. So if you could spell out the address of your website, that would be great.
Yeah. So it's HelenParsons.co.uk.
And thank you for that. And thank you for agreeing to join me here. I was just so fascinated when you told me what you did. I had to bring you on the show.
And just to say, Tania, I mean, I've been a doula for about 12 years.
Yeah.
And so all my birth work, really up until about 3 years ago, when I started to look at perinatal well-being and anxiety and pregnancy and trauma, I wasn't using tapping. I only trained 3 years ago. Yeah. And it's transformed my work as a doula, as a perinatal educator, as a therapist. I mean, it's made me a better doula, I think, a more rounded doula that can deal with pretty much anything that a client may bring to her situation when she's pregnant. And we are going to bring all sorts of different baggage and experiences to our pregnancies, and to be able to help women to clear that is amazing. So it's transformed my practice, and therefore it's transforming my clients' lives as well. And I trained with you, so I'm in awe of EFT and the work. It's just incredible. I mean, it probably comes across how passionate I am about it, but it is life. I mean, I've had clients say it's life-changing for them. Absolutely life-changing.
Well, then what I would add in, you're a trauma-informed doula.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is key, actually. I think it takes it to the next level, a trauma-informed doula, because we so easily can get triggered by different things related to unprocessed emotion from the past. And, you're going through those events of being pregnant and then going through the birth. Really, you want that to go as smooth as possible, in a really nice way. So thank you, Helen, for that. And I'd love to invite you another time, but for today, I will let you off, let you go home with your day.
Thank you, Tania. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, bye.